All right, so we're in the middle of chapter 1 here, of Mitzvahs Haamonas Elokus, the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, analysis of the mitzvah to believe in Hashem and what that means. So we are at the centerfold, so you should have the staples in the middle of the page. We're there because last week we finished the middle of the preceding page, but there's a parenthesis which I'm going to gloss over at the moment, although it's a subject that we're going to come back to.
Like the middle.
Middle, yes. So the centerfold, yes, exactly. On the right-hand side. So after the parentheses, and there's like the two words that say v'inyan zeh in the Hebrew or in English, this concept. That's where we are. So where are we holding? Based on the question of Rab Chizdai and the Baal Halachas Gedolos, which challenged the idea that believing in God is a mitzvah, not because believing in God isn't important, but because it's a prerequisite for mitzvahs. If you are listening to commandments, you believe in a commander, there's no reason to believe in the commander. We already know this. So the Tzemach Tzedek takes that a step further and says, if that's the case, then whatever it is you would logically know about God before you are commanded is not part of the commandment. And the commandment, therefore, is to believe in something that you didn't know prior. And he's building this from the Abarbanel, who had his own suggestion, which the Tzemach Tzedek rejected. Right? The Abarbanel's suggestion was that the mitzvah would be to know the fact that God is the most perfect being and the primary being. To which the Tzemach Tzedek said, well, what else is God if he's not the primary being? You know that already. Yeah. And therefore, what's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is therefore to know that God transcends being creator. The fact that God is creator is known from creation. And the mitzvah, therefore, is God introducing himself and saying, to believe that this God you know of already, who's the creator, is beyond being creator. That's essentially what it is. And today he's going to give us a little bit more language for that and give us better reason to, and better words to explain why it is we know and understand of God being creator and doesn't require any faith. And how we know that. And therefore the mitzvah is to know that God is beyond. This is where we are today. Clear so far? This is hopefully coming back to everybody.
Basically, It doesn't define you. Being a creator doesn't define you.
Correct. It's a chosen role to be creator, but he is inherently beyond the whole idea of creation or being a creator at all. That's essentially what we're about to describe. Okay, so let's see. The inyan zeh, this concept, this idea that God transcends, hu hanikra b'zoyar, on the right-hand side, middle of the page, hu hanikra b'zoyar, that's what's referred to in the Zohar as, quote, soivev kol almin. The word soivev kol almin literally means surrounds all worlds, but surround, as we're going to learn soon, and as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, not in the part of Tanya we learned, in the other part of Tanya, that the word surround all world doesn't mean far away. So it's not as if you take a rocket ship and bust it through the galaxy and you'll bump into this God that surrounds all worlds. But the reason why it's called surround is because it transcends. It's everywhere, present everywhere, but it transcends creation rather than invested within creation. Transcendent or emergence, if you want to use those two terms. Transcendent being sovev kalam, that which surrounds all worlds, the transcendent. And that's what we're describing here as the belief in God beyond creator. And in the Zohar's language is called sovev kalam. Okay. Shal zehi mitzvah samuna. And of this, we are commanded to have faith. That's the mitzvah. To believe in this notion of a God that transcends creator. Aval bat, b'vchinas memale kalamim, with respect to the element known as, in the Zohar language, memale kalamim, which is the opposite of soivev, the inverse. Soivev means surrounds, memale means fills. So whereas soivev is the transcendent, memale, that if you're talking to someone learning Chassidus, you just drop that word and know what you're saying. Soivev, memale, not even saying the rest, kol almin. Right? Soivev means surround, memale means fill. Like sivivon, circle, surround, memale, like malay, full.
Yeah, we discussed this in Tanya.
Yeah, a little bit we discussed it, yes.
This wasn't the second part.
In Shar Yehud, we discussed
Describes, yes, it did, right, that's right, correct, that's my apologies, yeah. It does describe it there. So, those would be the words that we're going to use. Soivev, memale. So, when I say the word soivev, you'll know I'm talking about transcendence, and when I say the word memale, you'll know I'm talking about God as he's invested within creation.
Is this when you give an analogy of like the cup in the ocean?
Correct. That's right, yeah.
So
That's
I
right.
just picture that when you say it.
Yeah, that's right. So we'll remind everybody that, because we're going to give a different analogy at the moment, we'll remind everybody about an analogy we used, thank you, where just to make this point that Soivev and Mamale are both everywhere. It's just a question of how they relate to everything, right? So Mamale, where God fills all of creation, whereas within, we use the analogy of taking a bunch of different vessels and going to the sink and filling them up, where the sink has to contend with the size of the vessel and either spend more time flowing or less time flowing, and if there's a hole in the cup, the water's going to spill out, right? Then you take all those same vessels and you dump them in the ocean, where the vessels are equally full, or arguably actually more full in the ocean than they were by the sink, because that cup with the hole can't get full from the sink, but it will be full in the ocean. But nonetheless, the ocean doesn't have to contend with the cups that are in it. It doesn't have to think about, okay, how big is that cup? Let me fill it up. It's irrelevant. So that's how you would think of God being transcendent. He's everywhere. So whether there is a world or not a world, or a billion creations or 100 trillion creations, it's all the same. Like the vessels in the ocean, as opposed to Mamale, where God is invested within each creation. So yes, well, what kind of creation is this? A cup? Okay, so we'll give it that kind of energy. That's an angel, we'll give it that kind of energy. Like the faucet that fills up the various different vessels. Okay, so he's going to give us a different analogy. Okay, so top of the left-hand column there, the left side of this center fold. So of this level called Mamale, where God fills all of creation, emergent within creation, it would be not appropriate to use the term faith, because faith implies that which is beyond. I believe because I don't understand, or I don't know it, and therefore I believe in it. But when we talk about God as He invested in creation, that's not something we believe in, that's something we know. And I'll explain how. Ella, rather, our relationship with God as He fills the world, Kamosha Kosov, is parallel to that which the verse reads, for my flesh I see God. That's the verse. For my flesh I see God. And this verse is used a lot throughout Chassidus and other Torah works to highlight the fact that we use our own experience as a model to understand God, which follows. The verse says God created man in His image, so it would therefore follow that understanding how we operate will give us a kind of mirror into how God does. So Echze Mamish, the terminology here is Echze, which means to perceive or to see. V'hu Targum Shal Re'iyah, and this is the Aramaic translation of the word Re'iyah, which means to see. So for my flesh, I see God. Why are we using that language, see, rather than understand or know? It's not Ipsari Eida Elokim. For my flesh, I will know God. It's I will see. Why are we describing it as see? So you can explain why in a moment. Yeah. Sorry.
This is in the context of Mamala?
Correct. Mamala is I see it. Soivev, Emunah, believe. Right? Because it's transcendence, I believe it. But this, which fills, I don't just believe in it, I see it. But he's using specifically the language of see. The verse uses the word see, to see it, not to understand it. So you explain why. Vagam, although it is true, we're not talking about physically seeing de'ene basar of fleshly eyes. That's not what we mean. Because when I look at my fleshly eyes, I see a table, a phone, and a cup. Nonetheless, it is, nonetheless, as if I literally see this idea, this concept. Sha'akadosh Baruch Hu, that the Holy One, blessed be that God, gives life and vitalizes, and that's the correct term, all worlds. So how would I see that? She explains. The idea of seeing something in one's mind. Sometimes you say, I understand that. And then sometimes I can see this is what's going to happen. What do you mean when you say you're going to see that? You see that this is going to happen, rather than I understand or I think. What do you mean when you say that?
You understand it clearly. It's
right.
Clear to
But it's so clear, that I know it's going to be that way. Yeah. So when you say I see it, it's much more than I understand it. So I'm certain of it. I'm certain of it, not just I understand it. Or I think this is going to play out this way. May not, but I think based on my analysis, this is how it's going to go down. But then when I look at your kid behaving in a certain way, and you see that this is what's going to happen. You see how it's going to go down. And you want to explain it to the kid who doesn't understand what you're saying. Because he doesn't see it. But you see it. You don't just understand it and postulate that it might go. You see it. Because you have a deeper understanding of reality. And therefore you see that this is how it's going to play out. You're certain of it.
Yeah, but it's based on experience.
So in that case, it's based on experience. And in a moment, we're going to see how it also, in this case, is based on experience. This too is based on experiences, we'll see. So, to see something with one's mind is bedover shenis ametz eslai, is regarding something that has become so true to the person in Yonah, this concept, this idea, it is as if I've actually seen it with my physical eye. Right? When you see what's going to happen to your child when doing X, Y, and Z, it's as if I saw it with my eye because I'm so certain of how it's going to go down. This amsuzu, and this certainty, Humasha Kosov, is what the verse refers to when it says, from my flesh I will see. From observing my flesh, I will see and be certain of God's presence. In the same way I can be certain of certain events, giving my experience or knowledge. So now he's going to explain how. How is that the certainty of God's presence stem from my flesh? So he explains. Just as it is absolutely certain to a person, inyan chayas nafshay, the fact or the idea that the person has a living, how do they translate it? Vitality of a soul, a livingness within him, a living soul in him. I feel myself alive. I feel myself conscious. Right? Sheyesh mahus nefesh. I am certain of the fact that there is a conscious thing. He translates the word nefesh as soul. I don't think it's a correct translation. The correct translation for soul would be neshama. I think a more correct translation of nefesh would be a conscious self. I feel a conscious self. I feel it. I know its existence. And I know that malubashes begufay. I know that it's invested in my body. Hamachaya oisei, and that this conscious self animates my body. I know that. I feel it. I know it. It is patently obvious that physical flesh bodies do not enliven themselves. Because on its own, on its own, the body is just as alive as meat and bones sitting in my pot in my kitchen. It's very graphic and gruesome, but that's the reality. Like the physical flesh myself is no different than any other flesh that we see. It just so happens to be me. Right? So there's a certainty I have that I'm alive. And that livingness doesn't stem from the skin, but it's invested in the skin. It's invested in the body. It's a certainty I have. Right? Or rather, Shehu Chai, my body is alive. Mitzad Chayis HaNefesh HaRuch Mishabai. The spiritual, metaphysical, conscious self that's invested within the body, that's what it is. This is the life force that is invested in the blood of the person. As the verse reads, for the blood is a person's vitality, is his soul, is his life. Right? Or in English might call that sentience. Sentience, I think that's the word. The sense of feeling alive, right? When I close my eyes and I tap my fingers, I know I'm touching myself. It's not like if I wouldn't know the difference between the table and my finger. And not just because of the sensation, but because I feel me in there. That's the nefesh. That's myself. That's my consciousness that I feel in me. And I know it's there. Right? Now here's the point. If so, even though the person has never seen what that consciousness is within him, how it is and what it is and why it is. I never saw it. I don't understand it. In fact, my 3-year-old saying, I feel or I'm alive, has no better understanding or no less understanding than I do about the fact that I say I'm alive and I'm conscious, I'm aware. Even though I'm much older and I can talk much more about it because I've lived for it for longer and there's all kinds of philosophy books you can read about the nature of consciousness, but at the end of the day, I do not have any better true perception of what it is because it's not something you see. Right? It's something you experience. And thus I know it's here. Right? In fact, my father likes to quote, right, the famous philosopher Descartes, who said, I think, therefore I am. My father likes to quote that a lot. And what he means by that is that the only thing you're absolutely certain of is that you're here. Right? You're aware that you are here. Good morning. So I know I'm here, not because I understand that idea. I don't understand the idea of my consciousness. I do not understand it. I don't have much words for it even, or explain it to somebody else. But I know it's there, because I have it. And therefore, so in Kozeh, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs in from like the first leaf over the centerfold. In case so, Hagam Shema Olam Leira Adam Hosa Nefesh, even though the person has never seen his very consciousness, Shaboy, that's within him, Eichu Mahi, how or why or what it is, in Kozeh nonetheless, Nisames Etzloi, it is absolutely certainty, borrow clearly Mitziusat's existence, Ayadea Seichel from my mind. I think about it, and therefore I know it's there. This is the true idea of the mind's eye, to see with one's mind's eye, is to experience something on such a deep level that in my mind I can say it is there, right? Which is kind of what happens on a lesser scale when you're talking to your 3-year-old and saying, this is going to happen if you do this. Even if you can't explain it to your kid and the kid doesn't understand it, you can't explain it. But in your mind's head, because of experience and because of what you know, I know this is going to be there. I know, and I see it. I see it playing out in front of me, right? That is a similar thing, if anything, not as strong as the seeing, the fact that I am here. It's something I see to be true. I'm certainly clear of it because I'm here. It's the only thing I'm certain of. So, Shahu Imus Chazak Kariyas Ein Mamish is a powerful certainty akin to seeing something literally with my eyes. So here, that's what the verse means when it says, "For my flesh I still see God." In the same way I observe myself and I feel a consciousness within me, and I know there's a flesh. Flesh is not where life comes from, but my flesh is being alive, and by that consciousness, that's metaphysical. So too, Erza Lekal Mamish. I can see godliness, literally, I see the world alive and in existence. Not just in existence statically, but alive. There's livingness to creation. Things are growing, things are dying, things are decomposing, and things are reconstructing. There's a livingness to creation. Everything's interplaying, everything's moving. So he's making actually a deeper argument in some way than the argument we heard from Rambam. Sorry. The argument we heard from Rambam was a philosophical one. That things cannot create itself. One thing is created by something else, and if you go far back enough, there has to be a beginning point, right? The unmovable mover. We see everything moving, things are changing, things are evolving, so you have to go back to the beginning. There must be a starting point which is beyond. That's a philosophical argument. It's not an experiential one. It's not something I can say I know with certainty the way I know I am consciously alive. I can't. It's a philosophical argument which hypothetically could be counter-argued by some other philosophical, something that's smarter than me, or can outwit me.
Which one? The felt experience?
No. The fact that God is the first creation, because I see that things are, I philosophize about the fact that things don't create themselves and therefore must go back to a beginning point. That's a philosophy that can have a counter philosophy. No one can sit across from me and convince me I'm not here. You can't philosophize your way out of that. If I'm thinking and listening to you, I'm here. No one's going to sit across from me and give me a philosophical argument against the fact that I'm consciously here.
No, but people can deny their own experience. You're like,
they can deny their own experience.
Consciousness. It's only like a personal thing.
Okay, so they can reframe consciousness as something that's emergent rather than something that's submergent, if you want to use like modern terminology. But they're not going to deny the notion of consciousness. In fact, you have a much harder time explaining emergence than submergence, just by people's conscious experience. It essentially means like this: they're modern materialists who want to believe that there's nothing but the material world. Their biggest hurdle is consciousness. Right? Anybody who wants to argue it's actually becoming less prevalent, but it was very, very, very prevalent. This idea that the world is only materialistic, nothing else. So how do you deal with the fact that there's consciousness? It's an observable experience. When you do scientific experiments and you want to see what's true, you talk to as many different circumstances, and if all the circumstances have the same thing, you know it's true. So all circumstances, all people across all culture, across all time, all describe consciousness. So it must be there. Okay, we can't deny its existence. So what do we do with it if we believe that there's only materialism? So they came up with this thing which is called emergence. That is to say, materialism becomes so powerful in its computing ability that what emerges out of it is something that feels self-aware. Something like that.
But that's the atheist. That's what they
That's
think.
right. So
that consciousness is just part of nature.
It's not just part of nature. It emerges out of materialism, which is a very big leap. In fact, one of the biggest hurdles to Darwinism is this idea of how you go from the non-conscious to the conscious. How do you do that? First of all, between inanimate and then animal, and then certain animal to human, or even any species. It has yet to be scientifically observed evolution from one species to another. They came up with a word for it, transspecial something. But you give it a fancy name, and now it doesn't have to be explained because, it's called that phenomenon. What is that phenomenon? Whatever. And it hasn't been observed. It really has not been. It's a real thing, and it's something that scientists contend with. Because again, the idea of consciousness emerging out of the idea of consciousness that everybody experiences something that's non-materialistic, to then say it's the emergence of a materialism is a very difficult argument to make. Again, rationally, you can philosophize your way, but the person listening to you is like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm conscious, and it's not this. In fact, this is a rabbit hole you can go down, but in fact, one of the counter-arguments that's very difficult to undo is the fact that I'm aware of my consciousness, which means there's my consciousness, and then there's me looking at my consciousness. So where'd that emerge from? So the material emerged a consciousness, and then that emerged something else that's aware of its consciousness. It's a very difficult...
Yeah, but does that mean there is a God?
Okay, so the logic is there. So this is what the Tzemach Tzedek is saying. It comes down again to how you define God. What are we defining it as? So from Rambam, we defined it as the primary being. Okay, the first primary being. That was a philosophical argument. The Tzemach Tzedek is arguing that we're going to look at God as the livingness of existence. Existence is a livingness. We know that. Look around. It's all living. So, and actually as science progresses, we understand that the livingness of existence is actually interconnected, not disparate, which was the original polytheism, right? The idol worship was that all of these livingnesses are different entities. Cold is one entity, hot is another entity, the desire for love is one, and hate is another, and all these livingnesses are competing with each other. But as we progress in our understanding of the universe, we learn that the livingness is actually very interconnected. So there's a singular, they call it singularity now. They literally call it, scientists literally call it the singularity, which is essentially a centralized, unified livingness of creation. Similar to a centralized consciousness that permeates all of my existence. So when I'm angry and I'm happy, it's the same I consciousness that's there. I'm walking, I'm talking, I'm angry, I'm happy, I'm upset, I'm excited, I'm lazy. Nobody thinks there's a different I in each of these things. It's the same me in all of these things. There's one central conscious self, livingness, that permeates all of that. We all know this. Right? And the reality of the world is playing that out in the same way, that there's a singular livingness in all of creation. So it isn't a philosophical argument, which is why the verse doesn't say, for my flesh, I know God. It's for my flesh, I see God, because it's an experiential one. I see in reality a central livingness to all of existence, in the same way as a central livingness to myself, to my consciousness. So it's a different argument than Rambam. It's not a philosophical one. It is, in a sense, experiential, but experiential in the sense that I intuitively know of this concept of a centralized livingness that animates a singular unit. So the universe, being a singular unit, has a singular livingness that runs through it, and that we'll call God. Someone else wants to call it singularity, knock themselves out. But it's the same thing, just different words to describe what they are. Okay, is it somewhat clear?
I think most people agree to that. Like even an atheist will agree.
Exactly.
To that.
It happens all the time.
It's telling them that there's a God in charge, and, that directs the universe. That then they won't agree to. Like,
right. So then
there is a livingness of the world. Sure.
Exactly. So at the moment, that's the define. Okay. Well, again, it's a word. So what do you mean when you say the word God? If what you mean is, right, it annoys me to no end. I probably shared this, where like you watch these debates about whether God exists or doesn't exist, and it annoys me. Like, can you please start off by defining what you mean by God? What are you denying and what are you accepting? Like, let's define the terms, and then you'll likely find out that you agree on 90% of it. Because to agree that there's a starting point to creation, pretty much everybody agrees that. To believe that there's a livingness to all of creation, pretty much everybody believes that. So, okay, we're already in 80% of our definitions of God. But we may have more nuance that God communicates to man. Now we're taking a little leap already.
Yeah.
That God communicates through prophecy and whatnot. Okay, so we've gone to the next level. But before we get to that, let's agree on the premises of our definitions of God. Right? And I imagine 80% of instances will agree. You may not use the word God, you'll use the word singularity, or you'll use the word, whatever, primary being. Sorry?
The universe.
The universe.
No, it's just what this being
the universe powers,
the universe.
Whatever they'll call it. So let's define the terms, and then we'll see if we agree or not, right?
Yeah.
So, but I'm just making this point that the Tzemach Tzedek is different a little bit than the Rambam. Not disagreement, but giving a different definition. As opposed to a philosophical argument to a beginning of time, we're making an experiential argument to a livingness that exists, vitalizing all that exists currently here and now. Okay? So let's go back to the text. It's the middle of the page, which says v'kach. The line begins with the word v'kach. Or in English, it begins with the word similarly. So v'kach, so too, or similarly, ech zeh leika. The verse says, I perceive and see God. Not understand, but I see. Mamish, literally. by observing the world as an existing, living thing. Each creation living on its level and in its relative form. These heavenly spheres, like the galaxy is moving. The earth has the ability to make things grow. There's a livingness. To make tree, grass grow, vilanis, and trees, ois and pri, that produce fruit. Animals that feel. Just as it is the person himself, I feel alive. Because the entire world at large, the entire universe, is like one large singular body or a singular unit, which the Talmud describes as a 500-year journey. It's actually more than that. The Talmud describes that it's a 500-year journey from the earth to the sun, and then from the sun to there, it gives a whole bunch of descriptions of 500-year journeys. Whatever that means, I don't know. If that means light years, if that means literal years, if that means metaphorical years, I can't tell you. But the point is that there's a distance to this universe, and it's like one singular huge unit. And it on its own, without a livingness in it, is a inanimate, dead piece of flesh, just as my body would be. So where is this vitality and livingness existing and pulsating through all of existence? Within each and every particular part of creation. So the livingness that you identify, or that you see, that's the divine force, the divine life force that's invested in all of creation. That he may be blessed, God, shines forth and infuses and invests within all of creation in general. At the top of the next page, as our sages put it, just as the soul fills the body, so does God. And Malak al fill the entire world. Okay. Okay. So now he's going to take the same. We have some more time. What are we holding? Yeah. If we can finish it, maybe not. Okay. So now he's going to take this into the next level, and just to explain the next few lines, it's a little bit more. Ethereal, I think is the right word, a little bit more abstract. So, till now we're talking about materialism as a dead weight body, and then a livingness that vitalizes it. That's what we're talking about now. But there are spiritual creations too. Angels, or even my consciousness is also a creation, right? Now, these spiritual entities also have quote-unquote bodies. But these bodies are not material, they're metaphysical. They're metaphysical bodies. Now, why are they called bodies? Because it's all a relative term. Everything's a relative term to what it is. So we'll start at the low end, and then we'll go to a higher end. So if I looked at this cup, it also has a body and a soul. This cup, it has a physical material, the paper, and then it has a metaphysical idea that's transposed onto the paper, that it's a cup. The materialism could be a flat paper also, which would be another soul, another metaphysical concept that's been transposed onto the matter. In the language of Rambam and other Jewish philosophers, it's called chomer and sura, matter and form. Everything has matter and form. It has its particular material that it's made of, and then the particular form that matter presents itself, right?
So it's paper and cup, right?
So that's what, paper and cup. Okay. Paper is the material, and then the form is the cup. So the functionality of this stems from where? The combination of, right, the particular form, its very existence comes from the matter, but the functionality of that existence is going to come from the fact that it's been formed into a cup. Because it can exist in some other form, and I would not be able to use it, right? So the same thing is true of everything that exists. Everything that exists has its matter, has the material, the substance by which it's made, and then has the form, the particular way in which it functions. So I used to use a cup, which is on the bottom of the totem pole, let's say. If you go to the top of the totem pole, you're looking at an angel. So an angel is made of spiritual matter, whatever that thing is. No idea. This angel is an angel of kindness. That's its form. And that angel is an angel of judgment. That's its form. And that angel is an angel of, I don't know, compassion, whatever the angel's functions are. But those are functions. By what matter does it function? by whatever spiritual matter exists on its particular realm. In the same way, the cup uses the particular matter that exists in our realm, materialism, and then transpose a form onto it. We now have a cup. So the angels have the matter of their spiritual realm and then the particular form that it takes. So the point is that even the most ephemeral, I think that's the word, spiritual existences also have a matter that has to be enlivened by some spirit that's beyond it that gives it life. So it isn't just the dead materialism of our world that needs to be enlivened. It's all of existence, even the most transcendent of them, that also have to be, quote unquote, enlivened. So God's investment in creation is not simply because of the physical matter that exists, that requires life, but all things require life. Even the most spiritual things require an outside force that gives it its particular form and life. Is that somewhat clear?
And for people, I guess the matter is the soul,
So
and
for
the form is the body?
Generally speaking, it's the matter is the body and the soul is the form, but even the matter itself has a matter and form. So the flesh on my hands and the flesh on my toes are not necessarily different, but they're different. Their form is very different, and therefore they function differently, even physically. So every little stratum of creation has both matter and form. You never can have one without the other. You cannot have a form without a matter. You cannot have a matter without a form.
So our neshama is?
Relative to the body, it's the form, but then in itself also has, quote, a body and a form. Every level on itself has a body, has a matter and form. It must. It doesn't exist otherwise.
I'm having a bit of a difficult time wrapping my head around that, though.
I know.
Okay, imagine matter. Imagine matter in your head. Does it have a shape?
Yeah.
Good. So you just have matter and form. Now take it and reshape it into something else. Now you have a new form. Now think of a form. It doesn't have a matter, that form? Sure it does. A white paper, I don't know, whatever form you came up with, has a matter. You cannot have matter without form or form without matter. And all of existence must contain the two of them. Otherwise you have no relationship with it or can talk about it.
The problem that I'm encountering is that I don't. I'm trying to wrap my head around the fact that the nefesh, the neshama, is the form.
Yeah, why would the
Okay, relative to the body,
The matter is
this materialism,
yeah,
which has no life, but now it's enlivened, and now
by the form. How is the neshama the? How is the neshama?
Okay, I see what you're asking.
Yeah.
Like
Okay,
it-
so let's look at it this way. So if we go back to the cup example, there's the physical form of the cup,
Right.
but that physical form of the cup is a representation of a certain functionality, right? So form is really a manifest functionality onto a particular matter.
But not necessarily. Some things are just in a shape or whatever. It would have a function necessarily.
So they have a very useless form, but they have a form. They cannot not have one.
But function, not necessarily. I'm just thinking, like, how does that?
Okay, so let's just take a big block of wood that has no function because it's just a block, right? But it isn't functionless. Put it down. It's just your stool now. And then if you wanted to shape it into your stairs, you'd have to have a particular model that would allow you to do that. Because if it lacked certain form, you couldn't make it into into your stairs, because its form was too small for you. Let's say. Right, so you can never escape
You're saying
either.
form is function. So how is the soul the function?
Okay,
of the
that's
body?
right. So the body itself is dead matter, which has a form, but that matter is dead on its own. So it has to have a higher level of form, soul function, that then allows my fingers to move and clutch the cup.
There's functionality and not necessarily form, but you're equating functionality
Correct.
and form.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Form is a manifest version of functionality. So functionality is more abstract, right? You have abstractions that slowly become less abstract. So finally, you have a physical cup in a particular physical shape. But it's a manifestation of a. Let's put it this way: the idea of cup exists even if no cups existed in the world. Even if no matter was ever turned into a cup, the concept exists. And then someone's smart enough to say, okay, we'll take this concept called cup and we'll make it work on that plastic. So I've taken the function concept form of cup and now put it onto a physical
Form is
paper.
a higher level.
Correct.
You
It's
would
more.
think
It's
it's
more.
the other way around.
It's the abstraction of whatever material you're using, right? So every material has its abstract version. So the physical me is here, and the abstract version of me is my consciousness. That's why I'm using the term matter and form. Yeah, this is actually a fundamental in medieval Jewish philosophy. Rambam Sajagon, you'll find it in their writings. Anyway, all to say, we'll have to pick up God willing next week, but all to say that it's not just the physical world that requires vitalization from a force that comes from in it, but all existences, even the most abstract of them, require a even more abstract life force to vitalize it. So the angel also has to have a vitalizing force. So the angel's existence also requires God to be its soul that gives it life, in the same way this body requires the soul of God to give it life. Yeah, that was somewhat clear.
Is that the concept of like Sobe?
This is Mamale, where he's enlivening every particular thing, where he's enlivening every particular part of creation. Sovev is going to be transcendent of that. Because this level of God is invested in every particular creation. He cannot invest the form of cup onto table. We can't do that. We wouldn't have functional tables.
So form is Mamala.
Correct. Tzura, that's in the Chaimer, if you want to do it that way. The point is, it's the livingness that permeates within creation, allowing each creation to exist on its particular level. And that's an observable reality. In the same way I observe and feel and know livingness within myself and all of its various different forms that it comes out, and all my moods and all my physical activity, it's the same livingness that permeates them all, even though here I'm presented this way, here I'm presented that way. There's a singular livingness to all of existence, even though here it's a leaf and there it's an angel. And everything in between. Right? So that's a knowing of God. And therefore, that's not the commandment to believe. Because the commandment to believe is that which is unobservable, unexperiential. It's beyond. That's the sovev which transcends even this description we just gave. Is that clear?
You think that an angel
I have
has...
to re-listen to this show.
You're saying it,
Give words. Let's see what else we'll add. Yeah.
an angel, you said, has a is a form, has something,
As-
some
yeah.
kind of form.
It's predominantly
Spiritual.
form, but it also has matter.
So right, so the matter part. So why can't a neshama also have a matter and form?
It does.
Oh, it does.
It does. So relative to the body, the soul would be the form, but the soul itself would have a matter and form too.
Right.
Relative to the body, the soul has a
Is form,
Is form.
because its functionality gives this body functionality. But if we took the soul out of the body after 120, we would look at it and also see a form and a matter. Spiritual matter and a spiritual form, we still see matter and form.
Mm-hmm.
On every level, you would see matter and form, right?
Good old Saint Jesus.
But here, in the physical world, relative to my physical flesh, my soul is all form. It's all functionality. It's all abstraction relative to my physical flesh. But relative to itself and its own spiritual world, it's sharing matter with all the rest of the spiritual world, and it has its own particular form.
I don't know why, but when you
It's not so relevant to the whole discussion. It was really just a side point to get to the point that even abstract angels require livingness in them. That's the main point of this whole of why I introduced this whole thing. But the idea still remains true. Sorry.
wouldn't the matter be at a higher level than the form?
How
wouldn't
so?
you think like that, like the soul itself, like the light force of the soul, is more important than its function? Like what it's made out of, shouldn't that
The
be
physic-
the mamala? And then the sobev would be its form, like what gives it like
Okay,
a
so
function.
you're touching on something that Chassidus does discuss, and tell me if this is what you're talking about. The matter is a greater novelty than function.
Yeah.
It's a greater novelty that God puts matter into the world than function. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and matter is like it's like the creation that's directly from God. Like
Yes.
you know what I mean? It's a
Yeah. So actually, that's true. It's the rabbit hole that I don't want to go down, but it's actually going to come up later. But the idea is that matter actually is a more direct creation of God because it's the more something from nothing than the form. It's the more something from nothing. Right? We can see one function evolve into another function, evolve into another function, evolve. So spirituality, we can see an evolution from one spiritual notion to the other. But then how does matter come out all of a sudden? That's the true something from nothing. Right? Which that actually is associated with transcendent. Because only the transcendence can just say, poof, you're here. But that's not something we can grasp or grapple with. Because it's beyond our ken to think of something's just here. But we could deal with is, there are things here and we see livingness in it. And that's mamale. There are things here and we see livingness in it. The fact that the things are here to begin with is already beyond us. In the parentheses, he actually does touch on it, which we skipped, and it's going to come back later. But that is a true point discussed in Chassidus. Is that
But I would think
clear?
it's
Yeah?
like more meaningful to elevate the material, like the material is in some ways like a more base level, and then we can like use the spirituality to elevate it.
Okay, so taking that idea and using the language you've been using here, in many places in Chassidus, the truth is, he actually never used the word matter and form here. I'm just using that as a parallel to explain what he's saying here. Here he just says that the angels themselves have bodies that require enlivening. And I just use the idea of matter and form to explain this idea of angels having bodies. Just make that clear. But if we want to use that language and describe what you just said, so in many texts it'll say that the ultimate objective is hitgabrut hatzura al hachomer, that the material, that the form should dominate the matter. Right? Meaning that the spiritual ability that it has should dominate its materialistic self, rather than the materialism trap the transcendent, or trap the spiritual. So my conscious self should dominate the drive that my materialism gives it, rather than my drive that my materialism body says dominate my conscious self, which understands that these things are silly.
What about when we say
That would be a way to say it.
we say a bracha and we elevate the fruit? That stands to reason that there's something in the fruit that's very godly.
That would be
has-
Mamali. That would be Mamali. It's just, at least as we're learning now, right? There's divine energy invested in that particular grape. I'm going to make a bracha, I'm accessing it.
But
you want to
there
use
was
that.
something inside of it, which isn't that the chomer of the fruit that we're
No,
elevating?
the spark is not the chomer. The spark is spiritual. It's invested in the physical to give it life.
But
It's a spiritual spark. It's a godly spark. It's in the materialism, and then through using the materialism in a spiritual way, I've now made the function of it more important than the materialism of it. But surah, the spiritual, more important than the physical. That's elevated it. If we want to use that language here.
And where was the godly spark? It was in the
In the
chomer,
material.
in the Torah.
In the material.
It was in the
It's in the material, sure. It's in the matter. Yeah.
okay.
To give it its surah. Right? To give it its spark gives it its form, if you will. Yeah. Something again we're going to touch also, the fact that this whole discussion is all going to be on like the transcendent meeting the infinite meeting the finite, which is part of what we're talking about here. You're talking about a transcendent, a metaphysical livingness manifest within material livingness. It's not something we understand. It's something we know experientially, because we experience transcendent consciousness invested in our material body, which is the point here. It doesn't say you understand this level of God. It says you know it or see it because you experience it. You experience consciousness in your physical body. Okay, so there's a livingness to the world. I can't tell you how and why metaphysical livingness is invested in matter. I can't tell you that. But as a matter of fact, I know it's a truth because I feel it every day. I feel conscious in my matter, in my physical matter, my fingers, literally.
Okay, wait, I have a random philosophy question, because you were talking about taking for granted the idea of us being conscious, like our consciousness, and feeling that we're in the world around us. But have you ever heard this conversation in philosophy, like the thought experiment of how do I know I'm not a brain?
Yeah.
And that.
That's what I was alluding to, yeah. I was alluding to that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mentioned Descartes, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Who's like the promulgator of that. That you think therefore I know I am, and
Right.
all I know is I'm a conscious thing, everything else is kind of secondary. But I touch my fingers and I feel it, I'm going to assume I'm here, right? That's how we all feel experientially, right? And that's the bottom line here. We feel and know, not understand, because we do not understand it. We don't understand our consciousness, and we definitely don't understand how our consciousness is invested in our body. Definitely not. But we know and see is the language he uses, with the mind's eye, that there's a livingness to my consciousness. And if I see, or there's a conscious livingness invested in my physical body. So if I see a physical world, this grand unit that's living as a singular unit with vitality, then it's pretty clear that there's a centralized, singular livingness that permeates all of existence. That would be Mamale. God's invested in everything to give it life, in the same way my conscious self is invested in all my body to give it life, and it's always there, irregardless of what I happen to be doing. So irregardless of what the world happens to be doing, making flowers or angels flying around, it doesn't make a difference. There's a livingness that permeates all of that. And that would be this idea of knowing or seeing God. And therefore belief, as we're going to learn, is that which is transcendent and beyond that. Okay, that's where we are this week. God willing, we'll pick up next week more on this, on the next level, on the faith, which goes beyond what we understand or know as we just described it. Okay.